In this video, I decided to challenge myself and make a Roblox game in only 30 minutes. There are a number of cool game concepts I could try to make, but many of them aren't doable in 30 minutes. However, with a bit of brainstorming, I decided to make a natural disaster survival game. With 30 minutes on the clock, it will come down to the wire. For those of you who've never played natural disaster survival, it's basically a round-based game where players are teleported into a map where they face a number of different disasters, like tsunamis and volcanic eruptions. So that would be the goal of this video, to make a game that resembles natural disaster survival in 30 minutes. I started by using the base plate template in Roblox Studio, and I inserted a part for the lobby. Then I enlarged the part for my base and positioned the spawn directly on top of it. I grouped the two parts together and named the model lobby. I renamed the two parts inside spawn and base for clarity. Next, I made the game area. I added a part for the base, scaled it up, and moved it away from the lobby. Then, I added another part for the spawn of our game area. For our map, I planned to have some elevated areas so that players can survive certain disasters. I added steps so that players could climb up and made sure that they weren't too steep so that they didn't get stuck. I added a roof and wall beside one of the steps for shelter. I changed the color of our spawn so it stands out. And finally, I selected everything, disabled the cast shadow property of our parts, and anchored them. This ensured our parts didn't fall apart mid-game. I then grouped everything together and named the model game area. I then began my favorite part of development, scripting. But first I had to set everything up. I inserted a script which would control the entire game, which I called Round System. I added some folders into server storage, which would help me keep track and control certain aspects of my game, like the number of survivors. I added a GUI which would display the time remaining for each round. Lastly, I inserted a remote event into replicated storage so I could reliably update the time remaining in the round for the players. Now, back to scripting. The round system script took a while to make. Essentially, this script would start a timer for intermission and teleport players into the map when the game starts. It would then choose a disaster and use a module script which I had created to run the disaster. When the game was over, when either the timer counts down to 0 or there are no survivors left, intermission would start again. I then inserted another script, named it Timer Update, which I added to fire the remote event as the time left changes so the players can see the updated timer. Now to update the display I created earlier, I added a local script inside the GUI which would do the updating. I ran the game to see if everything I wrote was working, and to nobody's surprise, it didn't. The timer wasn't updating. I stopped the game and very quickly I found the source of the error. The round system script relied on a value change of a boolean value, which I never actually implemented. So with a quick one-line edit of the code, we were back and running. I tested the game again, and this time the timer actually worked. As the intermission concluded, I was teleported into the game area as expected. At this point, most of the scripting was finished. This was good news as I was slowly running out of time. My main focus was now creating the disasters. I planned to have two kinds of disasters, acid rain and tsunami. I would focus on creating the acid rain first. The idea was to have a storm cloud spawn above the map and have toxic raindrops fall, which would damage the players if they were touched. To make this disaster, I inserted a part for the cloud. I scaled the part and made it the same size as the game area. I set the transparency property to 0.5, which makes it semi-transparent, and colored it dark gray. I anchored the part and disabled the Can Collide property. Lastly, I named the part Cloud and I placed it in the Game Assets folder I had created earlier. I then added another part to make the template for our raindrops. I figured that making the raindrops really big would make it really dangerous for the player. To create the acid rain, I decided to color the raindrop red and set the transparency property to 0.5. I named the part Raindrop and placed it with my cloud template. And I forgot to turn off the can collide property for my raindrop. We don't want our raindrops to bounce around, so let me turn that off. Now, back to scripting. I went back into the disasters module and began working on the acid rain. With my immense scripting knowledge, I was able to create a function that would continuously spawn the raindrops I made, which would also damage the players when touched. Lastly, it would also remove the raindrops and the clouds when the round was over. I think I deserve a pat on the back for that. I ran the game to make sure everything was working. I looked up at the sky and nothing. Nothing happened. So much for my immense scripting knowledge. I stopped the game and frantically searched for the error as time was running out. And there it was, in the round system script I had worked so long on, the error. I had forgotten to call the function. I couldn't believe it because it was like spending hours setting up a surprise birthday party for someone and forgetting to invite them over. I fixed this error and ran the game again, and this time it worked. But for some reason the raindrops didn't look like they were touching the ground. Also, the GUI froze, so I stopped the game and wrapped the two functions in a task.spawn function. Unfortunately, at this point, the 30 minutes were over and the timer had rung. Don't tell anyone, but I kept going, because the game was so close to being finished. Now I had to focus on the tsunami event. I had planned for the tsunami to just be one long part that would sweep over the map and unanchor everything so it all falls over. So I inserted a part and I stretched it wider and taller. I positioned it to the side of the map and made the tsunami part blue, because water is blue, I think. I then turned off the can collide property, named it tsunami part, and put it inside the game assets folder. I went back into the disasters module and once again I utilized my brilliant powers of scripting. Essentially, I cloned the tsunami part, added a touched event so that it would destroy any players it touches and unanchors any other parts. I then tweened the tsunami in the direction of the map. I ran the game and the tsunami ran away from the map instead of going towards it. Bruh. I also had yet another error that happened. Basically, if the round were to end, the game just stops and nothing happens. I found that I forgot to set the game back into intermission at the end of each round. After fixing that mistake, I repositioned the tsunami part so that it would be going towards the map instead of away from it. With this, the game was finally finished. So here is what the game looked like. I ran the game and the tsunami finally worked. It sweeps over the map and knocks over some of the parts. I wait it out and I test the acid rain, or not. After 2 more rounds, the game finally chooses acid rain. I got damaged a lot, so I hid under the shelter. But then I saw how close the round was to finishing, so I ran back outside where I endured a few more hits. Then the round ended and victory was mine. The cloud and the raindrops disappeared as expected. The game was a success, minus the part where I went a few minutes overtime. So that was my attempt at making a natural disaster survival game in 30 minutes. Well, 30 minutes plus a few. If you want to learn how to use Roblox Studio, check out my Roblox Studio Guide for Beginners. Or if you want to start learning scripting, check out my Beginner's Guide for Roblox Scripting. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.